Good to see you, Brad. So, I was texting some of the boys from the far country over there last night, and anyway, so 2 Kings chapter number 4. 2 Kings chapter number 4. And I thought Brother Parks was going to be here this morning. He may come in a few minutes late because he told me he really appreciated me going back over some of the stuff because he's been preaching at the other churches and he's been in and out. Speaking of Brother Parks, there he is right there. So, but he told me Wednesday night. He said, "I appreciate you going back over and hitting some of what you hit the previous week because I've been out and I missed it." So we'll start reading. We'll start reading in verse number 22. I think we'll pick up in verse number 22. And she called unto her husband and said, "Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God and come again." And he said, "Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It shall be well." Then she saddled an ass and said to her servants, "Drive and go forward. Slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee." So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, "Behold, yonder is that Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child?" And she answered, "It is well." And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet, but Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, "Let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her. And the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me." Then she said, "Did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me?" Then he said to Gehazi, "Gird up thy loins, take my staff in thine hand, and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. If any man salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child." And the mother of the child said, "As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee." And he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them, and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him, and told him, saying, "The child is not awaked." And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead, and laid upon his bed. He went in therefore, and shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord, and went up and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked to and fro in the house, to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon the child. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she was come in unto him, he said, "Take up thy son." Then she went in and fell at his feet, and bowed herself to the ground, and took up her son and went out. So again, we've been going over this chapter right here for several weeks now, and we made it past some of the verses that I read this morning. But one of my thoughts here that I don't think I mentioned is in verse number 23. Her husband said, "Wherefore wilt thou go to him today?" Her husband, this was the first time that you see that her husband really even questions her. I mean, anything else, she's like, "Hey, I'm going to make bread for him, and I want to invite him to the house." And he's like, "All right, whatever you want to do." She's like, "Hey, I think we need to build this chamber in the house, and we need to put a table and a bed and a candlestick and a stool there." And he's like, "All right, we'll do that too." And so here she comes to him, but she doesn't even tell him. I mean, he knows that he sent the child up sick, but she doesn't even say, "Hey, he passed away." She doesn't say a word, Brother Parks. And he doesn't even ask about the child. I mean, some of us fathers, or most of us fathers, definitely don't have a motherly instinct. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, if something's wrong, she'll tell us. But the mother, had it been the mother, she'd have been like, "Hey, what's going on with the boy? Tell me about the boy." Nothing else would have mattered. But the dad's like, "What do you got to do? What are you going to him for today?" She didn't even say, "Hey, what's going on with the child? Are you going to take the child? Do you want, what are you doing? Just why are you going today?" And so he questioned her, and he's like, "Hey," he said, "it's not new moon, it's not Sabbath." He's like, "It's not church day." It's not church day. Why are we why are we going to church? Why are we going to church on the first Sunday night? We don't have church on the first Sunday night at Concord. Why are you going to church somewhere? That's not what we do. And he's like, hey, why are you going to church? Why are you going to see the man of God? What? And she doesn't even tell him, brother. She doesn't even say, well, this is what happened. She just says, it'll be well. It will be well. And so this woman, she had a ton of confidence in God. We talked about that a lot last week. She had all confidence that God was going to raise up this child. And so again, we spoke in verse number 24 how that she saddled an ass. She's like, hey, she said, I'm going to do this myself. And whenever she asked her husband for a donkey, she didn't ask him. She didn't want one of the work ones. She wanted the thoroughbred. She wanted the fast car. She wanted the one that was going to get her to where she wanted to go. Emily was here last week, and Emily is a super speeder. And I don't know if y'all didn't know, but she was my super speeder in the clan last week. And she wanted one of the young men that knew how to put his foot on the gas. She wanted one of the young men that knew how to use spurs to the donkey and get that thing to go. And she told him, she's like, hey, she said, I want you to drive, go forward. She's like, look, don't you worry about me. Don't you worry a bit about me. She said, this is where we're going, and I want to get there. We're not passing go. We're not collecting $200. We're not stopping and seeing any of our friends along the way. We are going. She's like, drive, go forward. Don't you slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. She said, unless I say, ease up a little bit, just go. And so here is Elisha, and what he's going to say here in a second is fascinating me. But here is Elisha and Gehazi, and they're standing there, and all of a sudden they're looking out, and they see from afar off, and they're up on a mount, so no doubt they can see down in the valley right there, and they look and they see from afar off, and they see someone coming, and they're moving on. I mean, it's not just like, hey, just, someone meandering along the trail, but they're moving on, and they look and they see that they're moving on, and he's like, hey, is that not that Shunammite? And I don't know how she was dressed. Somehow Elisha could tell by the way she looked riding on that donkey that's who it was. So I don't know, but somehow there was something about her that he could look and say, hey, that looks like that Shunammite. Because she was still a pretty good ways off, because he told Gehazi to go run to her. So it wasn't like she'd gotten close to him. And so now I thought about it. I thought, now, surely there would have been some kind of conversation right here. Surely there would have been some kind of conversation about, what do you think she's doing? What do you think she's doing? I mean, she's coming towards us right here. It's, what on earth do you think she's doing? I mean, if you think about it, the first time he met her, what was she doing? She baked some bread. And it said she compelled him, she constrained him to eat bread. And so here they are, and they're like, well, maybe she baked a few extra loaves of bread. She says, bring us some bread. Maybe she figured out the 27 secret spices, Brother Parks, and she's got the Colonel's recipe, and she made us some fried chicken. They don't have any idea. And so Elisha even says it. He says, run now, I pray thee, and meet her, and say unto her, is it well with thee? Is it well with the husband? Is it well with the child? So he's like, hey, there's got to be something wrong. There's got to be a problem. I mean, she wouldn't be coming in the manner in which she's coming to see us unless there's a problem. I mean, if she was just, making the way, and he sees the husband and he sees the child, he's like, oh, they're just coming to see us. But the child's not there and the husband's not there. And so Elisha's like, I don't know what's going on. And so he's like, hey, just go ask her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? And is it well with the child? And so one of the things that I've noticed right here is I feel like, and this is my opinion, and so y'all know all about opinions, but anyway, this is my opinion, but Brother Randy, I feel like she saw through Gehazi. I think she saw through Gehazi. I don't think she had a whole lot of confidence in Gehazi. And so, I mean, you're going to see it here a little bit later. But I don't think she had any confidence in Gehazi. Gehazi was just the servant. He was not the man of God. And I think somehow she saw through Gehazi. And so when Gehazi comes, she just blew Gehazi straight off. Just, not wasting my time with you, not talking to you. You got nothing for me. You can't do anything for me. And so I need to see the man of God. And so Gehazi comes and he's like, hey, is it well with ye? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it's well. She just went right by him. She went right by him. And so in verse number 27, it says, when she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught him by the feet. She caught him by the feet. I mean, she jumped off of that donkey. She jumped off that donkey and she hit the ground. When she hit the ground, she grabbed Elisha by the feet. And so look what Gehazi does. I think Gehazi picked up. You ever pick up when someone just doesn't like you? You ever just pick up when you're like, I don't think I ever did anything to that person. I mean, there are a few people that I'm just going to be honest, that I could look at and say, well, I can see why they don't like me. You know, I mean, if you're just going to be honest, you're like, I probably did something back in the day. I shouldn't have done it. I've apologized for it. But you know what? I can understand, why they don't like me. But then there are other people like, I've never done a thing to them. I don't say anything to them. I don't think I've ever said a word to them except, hello, how you doing? But for some reason, they just don't like me. And I think, Brother Parks, that somehow Gehazi picked up that she didn't like him, and now right here, the feeling was about to be mutual. He's like, well, I'll show her. This is my opportunity. Any other time I'd have gotten in trouble, but here's my opportunity. She can't touch him. She can't touch him. and so he says, he comes near to thrust her away. It wasn't like he was going to go and say, hey, look, you can't be down there. He wasn't just going to go and say, hey, look, you got get up. Don't do that. Don't touch him. It says he was going to thrust her away, Chris. He was going to take her and forcibly remove her from where she was. He wasn't playing. And Elisha saw it. And look what Elisha said. He said, let her alone. Leave her alone. For her soul is vexed within her. Again, Gehazi, like I said, he should have seen that. He should have seen that. But I think he was so offended that she blew him off that he didn't care. And so Elisha's like, hey, let her alone. Her soul is vexed within her. And look at what he says. He said, and the Lord hath hid it from me and hath not told me. I mean, can you imagine walking around knowing that if something was going on, Brad, if something was going on, God would tell you? I mean, it'd make being a pastor, super. I mean, it'd make being a pastor super easy because you wouldn't have to wonder. But he's like, look, he said, it was almost an astonishment from Elisha that I can't believe this. I can't believe it got this far. I cannot believe that it got this far because he still doesn't know what's going on. He still doesn't know. He said, God hid it from me. He said, God did not tell me there was a problem. And it was almost a surprise to him that he's like, because he just saw her coming. He's like, hey, go ask if is it well with you? Is it well with the husband? Is it well with the child? Because he didn't know. And he's like, leave her alone. Her soul's vexed. I need to know what the problem is here because God hid it from me. God did not open my eyes and let me see that, it's the child that's the problem. I don't know what to do until I know what the problem is. And God did not tell me what the problem was this time. But it appears like in some other time, God had told him, this is exactly what's going on. And so look at, and again, I mentioned this last week. Then he said to Gehazi, gird up thy loins and take my staff in thine hand and go thy way. And so here again is the first and really, in my mind, the only time I ever see Elisha come up with a solution that doesn't work. I don't really think I've ever in the reading right here, in reading, do you ever see another time that Elisha says, hey, let's do it this way, and it doesn't work? I mean, he walks up to Jordan. He walks up to Jordan with that mantle. He says, where is the God of Elijah? Smacks that thing down on that water, and the water parts. You know, I mean, you have those kings. They're going to battle. The kings are going to battle, and he's like, we're going to dig a ditch. Y'all are thirsty? He doesn't call for rain. He's like, we're going to dig a ditch, and you're going to see water, but it's not going to come where you expect it. And it happened. He tells the woman at the beginning of this chapter, in chapter number 4, the widow woman that comes to him, he's like, what can I do for you? What do you got? What do you got? She's like, I got a little oil. He said, well, go borrow vessels. Go borrow vessels. And I mean, he just, whatever he said, it just worked. I mean, later on in this chapter, when there's death in the pot, he's like, just throw a little meal in there, it'll be fine. I mean, I don't ever see another time where what he says doesn't work out, except for this one time. And again, here he says, Gehazi, just take my staff. Now, he didn't let him take his mantle, but he let him take his staff. He said, just take my staff and go and lay it on the face of the child. And again, like I said, it had never not worked before. And so he says, Gehazi, gird up thy loins, take my staff in thine hand, go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. He said, look, this is serious, Gehazi. This is serious. It's serious to her, and it's serious to me. I want you to take this staff, and as fast as you can, don't stop, don't salute anyone. If they salute you, you're going to be rude today. You're going to be rude. I'm authorizing you to be rude today. And so just keep on going. If you see one of the sons of the prophets and they're like, hey, we need to see Elisha. I need something from him. Don't talk to him. Today's not the day. And so Gehazi does exactly what he's supposed to do. But look at what she says. Again, like I said, she gave Gehazi the vote of zero confidence. She gave him the vote of zero confidence. And so in verse number 30, it says, and the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And she said, look, I appreciate the fact that you sent Gehazi in front of us. I appreciate the fact that you sent your staff with Gehazi. But God's not going to bless Gehazi. I don't have any confidence in Gehazi. I have confidence in you. And again, we've mentioned this, and I'm going to mention it again. Whenever you're talking about these Old Testament prophets and stuff, the power was not the man. The power was the man, the God of the man. And so Elisha's power came from God. Elisha's power came from God. That's where his power came from. And so, but Elisha used that power according to how God wanted him to use that power. He did not stray to the left. He didn't stray to the right. He used it how God wanted him to use it. He took care, he was careful, and lived a good life, and did the things that God wanted done. And so she's like, look, I appreciate what you did right there, but that's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. And so she's like, I will not leave thee. I want you. I want you on the scene. I don't want your servant on the scene. That's not good enough for my child who's already dead. That's not good enough. I don't have any confidence in Gehazi. And again, Elisha thought it was going to work. He wouldn't have sent him if he didn't think it was going to work, Brother Tyrone. Elisha thought it was going to work. But somehow this woman, this Shunammite, who the Bible calls a great woman, somehow she knew it wasn't going to work. And it wasn't because of lack of faith on her part, because I believe she had as much faith or more faith than about anyone. I mean, we read it last week about Hebrews chapter number 11. In Hebrews chapter number 11, that has to be talking about this woman right here. That it has to be talking about this woman right here. And so she has this child. This child's dead. She doesn't do one single thing that says, I'm going to bury this child. She doesn't tell her husband, dig a grave. She doesn't tell the servants, go do this, get the body ready. She doesn't do one single thing that makes you think she believes that she's not eventually going to hold that child breathing in her arms again. And so she gets to this point. Elisha says, hey, here's what we're going to do. And she's like, not good enough. It's not going to work. And again, like I said, every other thing Elisha had ever done had worked. Everything he's going to do after this just works. But this one thing wasn't going to work. And she said, it's not going to work. And so she says, I'm not leaving thee. As thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. Wasn't part of the plan. Wasn't part of the plan at all. I mean, he's up there at Mount Carmel. He wasn't planning on going back to Shunem anytime soon. But she was so adamant that he's like, all right, I'll go with you. And again, Brother Croft, I mean, I'm sure he thought when he gets there, the child's going to be fine. When I get there, the child's already going to be fine. Gehazi's he's going to lay the staff on his face, and it's going to be up, and here's going to come walking. Gehazi and the child will come walking to us as we come walking up. That's not what happened. And so it says, Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Didn't work. It didn't work. It doesn't say, and Gehazi prayed, and it doesn't say anything about praying. Gehazi was just a servant. He was just a servant. And I, it's funny, sometimes people get close to a man of God and they feel like they're close to God because they're close to the man of God. It didn't do Gehazi any good. You have to find, me and my wife were talking, we were talking yesterday. You have to find God for yourself. You can have the best man of God in the world. Brother Samuel was a great man of God. Brother Randy, my father-in-law, great man of God. But you have to find God for yourself. Every young person has to find God for themselves. They have to develop a relationship with God and his son Jesus Christ, who's also God, for themselves. Why? Because, and Elisha didn't fail. But if your whole focus is that man of God, if something happens to that man of God, Brother Parks, what happens to those people that are so focused on following that man of God instead of following God? It destroys them. It destroys their faith. But the problem was it destroyed their faith. They blamed God, but their faith was in man. Their faith was not in God. And if you don't establish your own relationship, with God, and if something happens to that man of God, and I'm telling you, I mean, very few people in the Bible are like Elisha that you read and you're like, man, I can't really find any fault in him. I mean, really the only fault I find is what I've been mentioning right here. I mean, you have someone like Samuel. I mean, and Samuel, everything worked out good for Samuel except his kids. Everything worked out good for Samuel except his kids. But you take a man after God's own heart, David. Guess what? He made a mistake. You take Abraham, guess what? He made a mistake. People make mistakes. People mess up. And if your focus is on that person, it's going to cost you. And so you have to establish that relationship with God for yourself. Here's Gehazi, and this was his chance. Well, I mean, I could do what Elisha does. I could do what Elisha does. Nothing to it. Just lay it right down. It'll be fine. And so he goes up there, he lays it on the face, and nothing happens. And he's just like, oh, well, didn't work. And so he says, wherefore he went again to meet him and told him, saying, the child's not awake. Now, here also is Elisha's dilemma. Have you ever just run into a situation where everything you do just works? You know, I mean, whether it's on a job, and it's like, man, I mean, everything I'm doing just works. And then you come up to the time where it didn't work. It didn't work, and you're like, what do I do now? So here's Elisha, and everything he'd ever done just worked. Everything he'd ever done just worked. I mean, it just, boom. It came to my mind. It was God that was putting it on my mind, so I said it, and boom, it just worked. It's tough, Brother Croft. It is tough if all you ever do just works and you've never faced a dilemma before. It's good for, as a parent, to let your children face a situation. It's good to let them learn critical thinking. It's good to let them learn to work their way through problems. It's not good for us to always solve our children's problems. We want to. We're like, hey, I can do this and I can do this, but sometimes it's like we'll just step back and just let them deal with it. I'm probably too far on that end. I'm probably too far where I just don't want to step in at all. I just don't want to step in at all. I just want them to figure it out on their own. I think they're stronger when they become adults because of it. But I sure don't want to be on the other end where, child sneezes and the mom's running up there wiping their nose. It's like, give them a little space. Give them a little space. But here you have Elisha, and never failed before. Everything he did worked. And Brother Parks, this would be distressing, because it's not like this was the comfort of your own home and no one was around to see what was going on. You've got a child that's dead. You've got a mama that's looking at you. And I skipped over it. I think I skipped over it. But she said in verse number 28, she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? She said, I didn't even ask for a son. She said, if you'll recall, I didn't ask. Gehazi, I said to you, you asked what I wanted, and I said, I dwell among my own people. I don't need anything. Gehazi said, they don't have a child, and you're the one that told me I was going to have a child, and I told you then. She said, I told you then, don't you deceive me. And I mentioned it last week that she's telling him in that verse right there, she said, look, the pain of me losing this child is so much more than the pain of me never having a child, that I would have rather not had the child. I would have rather not had the child than have had the child and lost him. And so you have to remember that is fresh in Elisha's mind, that he's the one that said, you're going to have a child. And now she doesn't have a child anymore. And here he is. It's a pressure situation, Brother Parks. Like I said, being the church pastor is wonderful when the offerings are sky high and people are coming in joining. But when the offerings go down, and next thing you know, more people are taking their name off the roll than are putting their name on the roll, it's not any fun to be a pastor. It's not any fun. And the pressure just mounts and mounts and mounts, and you have church problems, and people aren't getting along, and it just keeps mounting and mounting and mounting. That's what Elisha was facing right here, and he'd never had to face that before. Because any problem he faced, just do this, it'll be fine. And it was fine. And so here he is with all this pressure on him, and she's not leaving him alone, Brother Parks. It wasn't like she came in, she said, hey, I want you to pray about this, and went off, or you're not going to see her again until Wednesday night. That's not what happened. She said, I'm not leaving you. I am not leaving you. And so here comes Elisha in verse number 32. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. If you remember, we talked about it, how that she took that child. The first thing she did, she took him up to that man of God's bed and laid him on that man of God's bed. She hid him off in that area. That way, if her husband come home, he's not going to go in. He's not going to go in there and look. This was between her, the man of God, and the God of the man of God. That's who this was between. Her husband, all he was, I need a ride. And so she laid him up on that bed, and it says he went in therefore and shut the door upon them twain, and he prayed. Can you imagine that prayer? God, you're going to have to help me here. God, you're going to have to do something here. This is beyond me now. My solution did not work. My solution did not work. This is beyond me. I did what I thought would work, and it didn't work. And I've got this woman sitting there looking at me, and God, she's right. She's right. If you look in 1 Kings 17, we read it last week, but if you look in 1 Kings chapter number 17, in verse number 18, we'll start in 18. And she said, and this is Elijah and the woman that sustained him, what have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance and to slay my son? So her son passed away, and look at what Elijah says. And he said unto her, give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourned by slaying her son? He said, God, how could you do this? How in the world could you let this happen? How did you let this happen? How on earth? I mean, you sent me to this woman, and I showed up at her place, and I'm like, hey, before you bake that for your son and die, you need to feed me first. And she did it. She did it, and she sustained me all this time through this famine. And she has sustained me. And God, how did you let her son die? I cannot believe, God, that you did this to me. I mean, I would have never, here she's doing good. She's doing good to me. I would have never, if I were, again, this is what he was saying. If I were God, I would have never let this happen. But that's what God let happen. And it says in verse 21, he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. It was a supreme burden on Elijah's soul, on his conscience. He's like, look, I can't live with myself with the thought that I came to this woman's house and she sustained me and this child died and I can't do a thing about it. God, you can't let it, we can't leave it here. He took it personal. He took it personal. And Elisha is also taking this personal. And he said he went in and prayed unto the Lord, and he went up and he lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. It just changed a little bit, Brother Jay. It just changed a little. Everything didn't come back. And so it says he returned and walked in the house to and fro. What do you think he was doing while he was walking to and fro? He was praying. He was praying. He's like, God, please, God, it's not enough. It's not enough that he's just warm. It's not enough that I felt a little something. It's not enough. I cannot go back. I cannot go face that woman again. I cannot face her again with a dead child. And so it says that he returned and he stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. So Elisha faced his dilemma, Brother Parks, with faith that God could do it. It shakes you sometimes. When stuff like that happens, you get shook. And you're like, how can this be? But you got to go back to the right source. It's not time to give up. It's not time to quit. It's not time to say, well, you know what? Oh, well. That's not what time it is. It's time to go back and say, God, all I got's you. The only person that can solve this situation is you. She's looking at me. She's looking to me to solve this situation, and I can't solve this situation. Because I'd have solved it with a staff. She's looking at me because she has confidence in me, but she knows where the real power is. And God, please, 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 God, please don't let this story end with this child in a grave. Couldn't end that way, Brother Jay. Couldn't end that way. Elijah's story didn't end that way, and Elisha's story could not end that way. And so even though he went up, he did what he thought would work, it didn't work. He went up and he did something, and it looked like it was getting a little better, but it wasn't fixed. He didn't go back to the house and pout. He didn't say, I'm going to Carmel. He didn't say, I got to go, I'm sorry. He went back again. Why? Because he knew it would work. Why did he know it worked? Because it worked for Elijah. It worked for Elijah. And no doubt when he's praying, God, you let this work for Elijah, you got to let this work for me. God, please. It worked before. It's got to work again. And so he went up and he stretched himself again, and the child sneezed seven times. And the child opened his eyes. Can you imagine the joy in Elisha's heart when that little boy opened his eyes? Can you imagine how that man of God felt when that little boy opened those eyes? I mean, you know, we all open our eyes, and I can't see for about the first 2 minutes. People call me sometimes. I'm trying to figure out who's calling me. But that little child opened them eyes and blinked them eyes. Heard that little voice. I mean, you can't imagine how the joy that man of God felt for that woman, for the child, but a thankfulness to God that, God, you put me in a bad situation, but you got me out. You put me in a situation that I was overwhelmed in, but God, you got me out of that situation. And so look at what the woman does. And he says, then he called Gehazi, and he said, call this Shunammite. So he called her. And when she was come in to him, he said, take up thy son. And look at what she does, Brother Jay. I love this about her. She bowed down. The only thing she wanted to do was hold that child again. But Brother Croft, before she held that child again, she bowed down and prayed and thanked God that she was going to be able to hold that child again. The only thing she wanted to do, you know, she wanted to run to that child and hold that child and squeeze that child and just feel that child's breath on her face again. But that's not what she did. That is not what she did, Brother Parks. She got down on her knees. She was a great woman. She was a great woman. But she got down on her knees and thanked God. And wrote her name forever in the history of this Bible. Forever in the history of this Bible, Miss Jimmy, because she just believed. She just believed that God could do it. That's all I got.